Hello everyone, today I want to show you how to create a desert landscape with geometry nodes. I could not find a single good tutorial on that topic, so I tried it by myself and this is the result. So of course you can change the height of the dunes and the seed, of course the X and the Y size of the whole landscape, the grass density and some other things. So if you want to know how to create that, just watch that video. So as usual, we will start with our default cube, activate it and click on the Geometry Nodes panel and create a new Geometry Nodes setup. Disconnect input from output. And we will start with creating the grid of our desert. And then we will create a grid, of course. And for the start, we will give it a size of maybe 200 by 200 meters because we are working in real world measurements. And we have to give it some resolution because we are working with this displacement. There is our desert, and for now we will create the base shape of our desert, and therefore we will need a set position node. And now we are going to create a Voronoi texture. We will need a math node that we set to multiply. We will need a position node, and we will need a combine x, y, z node. And last but not least, we will need a vector math node to bring everything together. So what we are going to do now is we add the distance output of our Voronoi texture into our multiply node, and we add the multiply. We connect that with the z channel of our combined x, y, z because we only want to affect the z position of each point. And we connect the position node with our vector math and the combined x, y, z with the lower input of our vector math. And what that will do is it gives us the position of each vertex point of our plane, and it gets distorted by the Voronoi texture. And that whole thing now goes into the position node of our z position node. And we see the texture is working, but of course it has some wrong parameters. First of all, we are going to change that from 3D to 4D. That will because we want to change the seed of our dunes later on, and we will change that with the v value, v parameter, and we have to type in a much smaller scale. I recommend that you work with the exact parameters that I work with, because it's very sensitive, these parameters, and if only one parameter now is not correct, maybe the whole thing does not work. Of course later on you can play with these values, but for the sake of that tutorial I suggest that you type in the exact values that I use. And with the multiply node you can now define the height of our dunes, and now we got some simple Voronoi texture that already reminds of some desert dunes. Of course it's still too artificial and we have to change that. First of all, we are going to make a new frame, hit Ctrl J, and to rename it hit F2, and we are going to name it desert base shape. Now we have to make some natural adjustments, and to do that we are going to copy that whole thing, that whole node tree, and hit Shift D to copy that. And what we're going to do now is we are going to create these typical dune shapes, because the wind is blowing from one side and there are some curves in these dunes. And to create that we we take the exact Voronoi texture and we are going to, no, we don't need that one. We only need that one, and we are going to plug the multiply into the X value channel of our combined XYZ, and that will have the effect that the dunes, the original Voronoi texture, is only distorted in the X direction, and that will give us the typical dunes shape. Of course, you can play with the values. I think maybe 10 is good. Maybe something like that. That's okay. And we can play with the scale of it. So to give it some randomness. That's maybe too much. Or maybe the multiply value is too much. Maybe something like that. That looks already pretty good, I think. And we also can change the animation factor. So that looks pretty good, I think. So what we can do now is that we have a better view on the result later on. We can add a subdivision surface node. And I think we can leave it at 1 for the moment. Later on, if you are going to render it, I would set it to 2 to get more details. And now we are going to add some more details to the desert. And at the moment, I think, at least in my opinion, the lines are still too straight and we need some roundness. And to do that, we are going to copy that whole thing, hit the desert base shape node tree, hit Ctrl D. And we can use that setup, but we will delete the Voronoi texture and we will create a wave texture. No, that was wrong. God damn it. I hate it. Now we will plug that right in here. And we are going to connect the color output with, I forgot to create a color ramp node. And now we can connect the color output with the FAC input, and the color output of the color ramp goes directly into the value of our multiply node. And now we change the values, the scale from 5 to 0.02, the distortion to 20, detail to 0, the detail scale to 0.5, the roughness to 1, and phase you can, that doesn't matter. And now we create a second set position node. If we now would play with these values here with a second add node, it would give some, it would mix that whole thing, but we want to add our wave texture after that whole texture node texture tree here is completed, and that's why we need a second set position node, and we plug that right into that position node of the second set position node. And that looks terrible because we have to adjust our wave texture here. By the way, we will rename that, activate the frame and hit F2, and we will name that dunes roundness, maybe something like that. So first of all, you can change the roundness with that parameter here, and with the white value in the color ramp node, click on the little white rectangle and now on that area here, and now we change the white into something gray, and as you can see, the wider it gets, it's more, the rounder it gets, and the darker it gets more sharp. So maybe you can adjust it the way you like to. I will go with something like that. That will do. And at the end now we will add some details to the surface, but that's also totally up to you. If you like it that way later on, you can just delete the last step we are doing now. So copy and paste that whole frame again, and we can leave all these parameters, all these nodes as you see them there, and we will need another multiply node, and we will bring that in front of our wave texture, and we will need a normal node, and we'll bring that right before our multiply node, and we plug the normal node into the multiply, and with that you can later on adjust the effect we are going to create now, and plug in the multiply into the vector. And again we will need a third set position node, and we will plug that one. I will name it adding erosion and details. Plug that into the position node, and we now should see some. We need to change the scale of the wave texture, and we also need to change the distortion factor. The detail we're going to make 10. The detail scale also 10. Roughness we can type in 0.5. And now you can play with these parameters. You can also change the gray level, and we can set it to something almost dark, I think, almost black, something like that. And now you can play with the values. I prefer to I would suggest to type in something low, and now we have something like I don't know, water erosion or some, I don't know, it looks a little bit more natural than just the plain tunes without any texture on it. And now we've got our tunes. The only thing we have to do now is to add some material and some grass, because even is in the best desert there are always some vegetation that can grow there. So first of all, I think we have to increase our subdivision surface level to see the result, and of course we will need a set shade smooth node. And we got our tunes, and now right at the end we are going to plug in our material with a set material node. And of course I've already prepared a material, and I renamed it Procedural Sand. Let's have a look at it. And that's how our procedural sand texture looks like. We have some wind sand ripples in here, and the color is pretty good, I think, for procedural texture. Let's have a look at the sand texture. There were basically, let's delete that, there were basically two nodes, two node trees. which are combined in a mix shader node. The first one is the sand with the waves, with the ripples in it. I've created a texture coordinate node, that to object, a mapping node, and that goes into a wave texture. Maybe you just copy these values. The wave texture goes into a color ramp, and the noise texture goes into a bump, where also the color ramp goes into. And that goes again into a bump. I just played with the values. Of course, you can make your own setup. I think these two bump nodes are redundant too much. And for the sand, I've chosen the value F09D51, and these parameters in the principled BSDF, and these are my waves, my wavy sand texture. And because the tunes do not always have these wind ripples, sometimes they are just flat, I mixed it with the exact same node tree, but only I forgot something. The color ramp node goes also into a displacement node. And first of all, the displacement is mixed with the node with the displacement, with the ripples, with the wave texture of the ripples, and the higher plugin comes from that texture here. It's only wave texture with color ramp. And it's going to be mixed with displacement and goes into the displacement channel. And the second one is just the principled BSDF, the color, but no bump at all, nothing. That's will make these areas where there are no ripples. And the factor of the mix shader and the mix RGB node, it comes from the texture coordinate nodes. Sorry, it comes from the texture coordinate nodes from the object, with a mapping node, a noise texture with these values, a color ramp, the black one, the black color is set to something gray, and the color ramp output is for the mix shader and the mix RGB node the factor, and the mix shader goes into the surface of the material output. So let's have a quick overview look again. Let's select that one too. So you have the overview of my sand texture. Now back to our geometry nodes. We also need some grass. And of course, to do that, we will need a distribute points on faces node. Distribute points on faces node. We will need an instance on points node. And I will use my grass models I completely created with geometry nodes. There is also a tutorial on that. I will put a link in the description below. So just drag and drop that whole grass model collection into our scene. Maybe we have a quick look at it. These are some different geometry nodes, grass models. And now we plug that into our instance, and first of all we have to activate pick instance and separate children and reset children, and plug that into our instance input. And of course we need join geometry node, and we plug our instance on points node into the join geometry node. That takes a second, and there we got our grass. Of course, that's way too much at the moment. Maybe we go with 1. Let's have a look how that looks. That takes a while, so beware that you always set the density to something low before you plug in the, your instance, and I think that's still too much. Maybe we can go with 0.3. That's maybe more like a natural desert vegetation. That looks okay. And now, of course, we want to rotate them because they all look similar right now. Also, we can't see it because the distance is very, very high. So to do that, we need a rotate Euler node, and we plug that in between our distribute points on faces node and our instance on points node. And now connect the rotation channel with the rotation of our rotate Euler node, and that one we will plug into our rotation node. And what this does, maybe we switch to the viewport shading. What it does is rotates all the grass according to the normals. So it looks more natural and they don't look up straight to the z-axis. And we want to give it, we want to give the grass assets some random rotation around the z-axis, and to combine the rotate Euler node with the random z-axis rotation, we will create a random value node which we set to vector. We only want to rotate around the z-axis, so these two can be set to 0. Type in tau. I think that gives us the maximum possible rotation. And now connect that into the rotate by input. We have to wait a moment again, and we see all the grass assets are now rotated randomly. And I think that's pretty all. Maybe there's one thing left we can do. You saw in the intro, you saw that skull. We can bring that into our scene too. Where is it? There's our skull. It's at the moment it's under our surface, and we will bring that up. And as you can see, we have here some normal skull texture on it, and we have some sand texture on it, and the sand texture is automatically always on the top. And to achieve that, we can jump into the material. And what I have done is, you can make that with any asset or any material you like to. That one here was the original skull texture, which I have downloaded from my Blender Kit add-on. That's here. I only have to type in skull, and now the add-on is searching for all the models with skull, and I've took that one. As you can see, we have much more skull models. Many of them are free. I will, if you like to, I will put a link in the description where you can 10% discount when you subscribe to the Blender Kit add-on. But of course, that's up to you. Back to our model, our shader. And what I've done now is I copied my sand without waves shader. You can erase that. It's a very simple shader. It's only a base color with some adjustments to roughness, and the metallic input. And what I've done is I made a mix shader node. That's the original texture, and I mixed that original shader with my sand texture with a normal node. I've created a geometry node which I connected with the normal output, connected the dot output with the color ramp, and the color output goes into the vector. And what that does is it gives us, it positions the sand texture coming from above only at some certain places where the normals are pointed up into the z-axis. You can play with these values, as you can see here, and that gives you some cool sand covered objects. You can do that with all the assets you would like to, maybe with a spaceship that's stranded on the desert or something like that. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and learned something. Hope I see you next time. Bye.